why do these people, the people who displayed epic incompetence and corruption and quite possibly criminality in this infamous signal exchange that broke over the weekend, why do they hate Europe so much? Noah is in Indiana, in the United States, as opposed to Indiana, I don't know, in Shropshire. Noah, what would you like to say?
Thanks for having me on, James. I really appreciate it. I heard a caller yesterday ask about United States listeners when you posited this question to them. So I listened to it at work. I was like, yeah, I got to chime in. But
thank you.
I personally, yeah, absolutely love the show. But when it comes to JD Vance and his ilk disliking the UK, disliking Europe as a whole, what the news media is training a lot of Americans right now with is the U.S. is footing the bill on a lot of, NATO, NATO's funding. We're footing a lot of the bill as far as foreign aid. The Ukraine thing, absolute nonsense, especially when they throw out numbers like $300 million. We can't trust that. It's roughly $170 billion, upwards to there. And I believe the statistic was 80% of it roughly spent within the United States. They just push these numbers our way, making us.
But do they believe
that we're the biggest?
Because this is
unfortunately.
So they're almost victims of their own propaganda. So the stuff that is put out there to persuade whatever the United States equivalent is of Billy Bunch of Numbers with a bulldog avatar. I suppose it's someone with a stars and the stripes and a single figure IQ. The propaganda they pump out to persuade them that things are other than what they actually are. They actually believe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like Steve Bannon says, the flooding the zone. And it's extraordinarily effective right now. It's shockingly so. I also talked to the producer about what the values of the UK and other European countries. They see you as limiting freedom of speech when in reality, you're one of the standard bearers of it right now. It's astounding to me what kind of spin they're putting on this. But really, I think it's fear, too.
Go on.
It's fear that we're going to look at you as a bastion of freedom. You as a bastion of what's sensible, what's right and wrong in the world. It's control. It's flooding the zone. It's propaganda at its purest form.
Well, you have just rang a bell, which first chimed when we were wondering what it was about Ukraine that so enraged Vladimir Putin. And it was the idea that they were looking west. And they were seeing what we had, and they were seeing liberal values, liberal democracy, freedoms that were denied them under the yoke of post-Soviet rule or under the yoke of Putinism, NATO, European Union, these institutions. You use the word bastion, and he had to persuade enough people that they didn't want these things that they actually wanted. And you've just used almost identical language to describe what Trumpian politicians are doing to the American people with regard to the same landmass, with regard to Europe. So when Ukrainians look west and terrify Putin, so Americans could look east and terrify JD Vance.
Precisely right. You see people like Macron sticking his finger in Trump's face and saying, you're wrong. You see Keir Starmer saying, we're going to think about putting peacekeepers in the Ukraine because we can't rely on the United States anymore. That makes me sick.
So this brings us back to Project 2025 and the idea that in order for these sinister plans to prevail, they have to steamroller reality. And Europe at the moment, for all its faults, because you've got the far right on the march in Germany, you've got the far right doing well here, you've got people who are very adjacent to Trump and sympathetic to Putin, close to the reins of power in many European countries, and in Italy, of course. They've grabbed them, but it is there's still enough left of what we would once have called Western values, but for the purposes of this conversation, we will call European values to spook the likes of Vance and Hegseth. How clever are they, Noah? I mean, Vance, I read some of his book, and he's not stupid. He's not stupid. Hegseth, I think, is very stupid, and that's why he's got the job. And he strains daily, to give the lad credit, he strains daily to prove beyond any doubt whatsoever just how stupid he is. But I worry sometimes that we credit these people with sinister master plans when there's no such thing in place. Why would Vance? He wouldn't just point at money. He wouldn't just point at military funding. If you could give him a truth drug and say, why do you viscerally hate Europe? Remember, they thought these comments would stay private. So it's not posturing, It's not propaganda, it's personal. Why, on a personal level, why would JD Vance hate us, hate Europe?
I look. I'm a big believer in a lot of this is coming from the top.
Yeah.
You're not gonna go unless the owner tells you to. I think JD Vance. I used to say this about Mike Pence when he was his vice president.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is stupid and dangerous. Mike Pence is smart and dangerous.
Yeah.
I'm a big subscriber in the idea that JD Vance is smart and dangerous. I think he is seeing the signaling that we are doing towards countries like China, like Russia. And we are trying to flex our muscles. We're trying to look like the attack dogs because he sees that there's value reaching across the other side to the people that we didn't talk to very much, to the people we didn't get along with very much. I personally think we are trying to shift the world order into a dangerous place for power. JD Vance sees it. He's got his hand on it.
And the biggest issue here is the one that is still quite hard to swallow, harder for you, I suspect, as an American than it will ever be for me as a Brit, which is that they look at, what would we call them, oligarchic nationalism. They look at what Netanyahu's doing in Israel, what Putin has done in Russia, what Erdogan is increasingly doing in Turkey, what Orban is trying in Hungary. They look at it and they think, I like that, whereas from the moment that Lord What's-His Chops walked into George Marshall's office and changed the leadership of the Western world, the United States has been repulsed by that form of government, and now it's being seduced by it.
I think this is what Trump 1.0 was supposed to be.
But he had too many people around him who were still capable of either recognizing reality or pressing pause or even reaching the brake on the juggernaut of destruction, because you need to destroy a lot of things before you can rebuild the United States in the image of a politician like Vladimir Putin.
I think the problem is that the people in the White House now, most of them only have a room temperature IQ. They are not well read, they're not well travelled, and they don't understand what Europe is. I think they see it as being a single country, which a producer was saying, the United States of Europe, rather than a collection of individual countries who have their own individual laws, individual leaders. There isn't one person in Europe that Trump or Putin can lean on to get their own way.
Yet.
There isn't, and there isn't going to be.
Come on.
We've been... I'm in Germany, James. We've been here before. That's
you've seen where the AfD are now as a result of the military spending announcements.
We've spoken about this before. They are really not. They're not popular here. They're not as popular as they've been made out to be.
Well,
they're
we
too
can only
popular.
look at the polling, and they've just hit 24%. Roughly the same as where Farage is, and he's another one that bends the knee for Putin and
they're
routinely.
not going to make government either. They're not. They're just not. But yeah, I think there's an element of jealousy as well.
Go on.
I think there's an element of jealousy as well. It's what George was saying. Your first call was saying that we have freedoms here. We do have freedom of speech. We have freedom. We have autonomy over our own bodies. We have free healthcare. We have free education. It's not all under one control. And I think Trump and his minions, they look at Russia, they look at China, and they want that autocracy. They want to be the only power that matters. And they look at Europe and they say that's not going to happen here. The individual leaders are quite happy to correct them when they lie. They'll stand up and say, sorry, that's not going to happen. No, you can't have Greenland, and if you try, there will be repercussions. We are in our absolute lockstep with Canada, so he can't control them either. It's fear and ignorance that makes them hate us. And I think they've been led down, the people who are putting this stuff forward have been led down the same rabbit hole from 2016 as the people who were manipulated in the UK and into Brexit.
Well, the parallels are clear. No one denies the parallels. Even if people who voted for it don't like the parallels being pointed out, Donald Trump pointed them out first. Donald Trump was literally talking. That's why Farage ended up on stage with him, literally talking about the similarities, because they both involve a suspension of reality, a belief in things that aren't true. No, I don't either.
That he was elected in 2016 and Brexit happened in 2016. I don't think that was any coincidence whatsoever.
No, nor do they, I don't think. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been in such complete unison for much of that period. And of course, in many ways, still now. You could just shorten your question, says Sheena, and ask, why do America, the United States and Russia hate us? It's the same thing. They don't like societies that sometimes manage to prioritise people over profits. I guess, maybe. And that question I asked you earlier, by the way, to which even I double take at the answer, despite the fact that I've known it for almost a decade. The last payment on the Anglo-American loan, this was a loan made to the United Kingdom, enabling its economy to stay afloat after the Second World War. Do you know who negotiated it? John Maynard Keynes. The last payment on that loan that was made in July of 1946 was made, wait for it, on the 29th of December 2006. That's freeloading Europe for you, repaying post-war debts for 60 years after the war ended.
I'm more curious about JD Vance himself, because as you say, I don't think he's not a dim man. I think he's pretty bright. And I wonder how he seems to be one of the most vehement anti-Europeans.
Yes.
It strikes me that how can he consistently hold the views that he does, these rather sort of odd views about Europe's laws and all the rest of it, so consistently, when he could do a lot of research and find out that actually what he's spouting is absolute rubbish.
Precisely,
and my view is that actually they are getting advice from people within the European landmass who are also frightened of liberal democracy, and you've already mentioned Mr. Farage. And I think actually Farage is quite an interesting character because, of course, he speaks very good English, he's very plausible, and all the rest of it. And I think he is probably, amongst others, I would imagine, is one of the main drivers for this misinformation.
There were rumours, weren't there, that Dominic Cummings had a private line to Elon Musk. He would be similarly, I don't know quite what the word is that would knit those two together, opposed to the current status quo in the United Kingdom. I somehow repulsed by their own country and incapable of ever stopping whining about it because they have very inflated opinions of their own brilliance. I don't know, or others. I mean, they've talked about the fella in prison, haven't they, with 10 names? Yaxley Lennon. They've talked about Andrew Tate being a stand-up guy. Farage constantly talking about how much they've got in common. So Twitter plus some bad individuals giving them a view of Europe that is not real but doesn't have to be. It's like no-go zones. It takes us back to no-go zones. All the Americans who think that London...
So.
Yeah, there it is.
But my point, and I think this is sort of quite interesting, is that after the Munich speech, when Vance, obviously committed a whole load of sort of terrible faux pas, a certain Mr. Farage, who I think was in the UK at the time rather than in Clacton, said that he'd known Vance
No way was he not in Clacton. The fella's always in Clacton. How dare you? How dare you suggest that he wasn't in... Sorry, carry on, Alex.
But Mr. Farage was interviewed and actually said that he'd known JD Vance...
That's right, yes.
...long before he became interested in politics. And there you have it.
And there you have it. Almost as if these weird meetings that he attends and these very lucrative speaking engagements that he enjoys, all, of course, in preference to representing the people of Clacton, may date back rather further and run rather deeper than he would ever let on. He did let that slip. I remember playing the clip out at the time and wondering out loud what the hell was going on.